Now there's a reason why Maschine is very vital to me in my music production process when it comes to integrating with my DAW. The number one reason for this is the Maschine's sampling capabilities. I'm going to show you in this video how I do it with the sampler engine in Maschine to make better drums or better synths towards my production process. Let's go! Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is basic sound design in the sampler of Maschine itself. Right now in Maschine, this group, I have one synth sample that I've loaded up. As you can see in the sampler over here, I'm just going to play it once. There are two things in Maschine that I want you guys to understand. There's the basic sampler that is on top and the more detailed sampling section over here in Maschine. It's at the bottom part of it where you can always activate it by clicking this audio waveform kind of icon. Let's look at the first part, which is the top part here. Now this is the basic sampling feature that comes with Maschine. Now the first settings, as you can see, is the voice settings and the engine settings. This is very useful because you can actually create different kinds of like glides, especially if you're doing 808s, or you can glide between notes of your sampler. What you're going to do that is turn the polyphony to legato, and you can always up the glide. The next thing is basically how much pitch bend you want to add to the sound, and you can also have the engine change to more like a MP60 or S1002 kind of sampling method. It gives a bit of grit and warmth to your samples. As you can see, when I was browsing through the sampling engine earlier, you can hear a little bit of difference. It's a little bit more harsher, and you can hear that there's a bit of grit and noise to the volume of the sound itself. And what you heard just now is basically the one shot. So when I press one of the pads, the sample will play throughout of the pad. You can actually change the sample to an ADSR mode, which is an attack, decay, sustain, and a release mode. Now, if I were to change the attack higher, you can hear that the sample is getting from soft to loud. With ADSR, basically, as long as you hold on the pad, the sound is going to be played consistently until you let go of the pad. So that's the power of the ADSR engine in the sampler itself. Now on the left here, we have the reverse, so you can actually reverse the sample. So if you're doing like vocal samples or synth samples and you want to really manipulate it, this can be a good starting point by reversing the samples. You can also tune it. Basically, you can tune up and down or the sample itself, but this will affect the tempo. But for now, we'll just play with the tune and you can hear it. So if you want to resample songs and make it more interesting, you can always down pitch them or up pitch them as a reference through this pitch and gate settings over the pitch envelope here in the general basic sampler. The next part is actually the effects filter. It's quite basic here. You have the compressor, the drive, and you also have this SR and bits section where you can actually manipulate the synth a bit more to make it sound more 8-bit-ish. So when I play a note, then you have the SR. So this gives you like the retro contra kind of sound. And then you can always turn on filter, you low pass, you got a band pass, you got a high pass, and also the EQ. Example, I put on a low pass, you can always adjust the cutoff. And then there's also the resonance. Now this is quite comprehensive for a sampling engine. Everything is done in one sound slot, so it's quite amazing. Next is a modulation and the LFO. Now I won't go too detailed on this, but if you're familiar with wavetable synthesis or sound design, now modulation is basically having your envelope like ADSR that actually controls a certain parameter of an effect towards your sample. LFO is the same thing, but it repeats because it's basically a sine wave pattern or a triangle pattern. Now, if you look at modulation, you can have the envelope here, which is the ADSR. You can apply these to the pitch, the cutoff, the drive, and the pan as well. You can hear that the note or the sample is basically being pitched up, but based on the graph that you set on the modulation envelope. So that's pretty cool if you really want to play around with your samples. Now the LFO, you can change the wavetable of the LFO to a sine, triangle, rectangle, saw, or a random. Now for a more obvious kind of sounding LFO, I'll change it to a triangle. You can even sync it to the tempo, which is log, and you can change the speed of it based on your tempo. And of course, you can assign this to the 4 basic things, which is your pitch, your cutoff, your drive, and your pan. It really kind of makes the sample more interesting. Of course, you got to do it to taste, but this is a really good starting point for sampling your samples in the sampler engine of Maschine. So the number 2 sampling method that I use mostly in my Maschine is basically the layering method. Now what application suggests this kind of method is basically doing your drums or your drum samples in case you want to layer drums and stuff like that. Now let's look into the basics of this. Now we're not going to look at the top part of the basic general sampler engine. We are now going to look at the more in-depth part, which is the sampling part. So I'm just going to click this waveform icon over here. Now when you're in the sampling engine, the detailed sampling engine, you can go to edit and you can see all the waveform that is within the sample itself. So in order to really understand how it works here, you have to go to the zone settings. Now this is where you can actually make your samples stack on top of one another. I have 2 samples over here. As you can see, I have one drum loop at 140 BPM and the other drum loop at 140 BPM. All you need to do if you want to layer drum loops, you can always click the plus icon and you can always choose your drum loops wherever you have. If you look at the bottom here, there's the play range, the loop, the tune mix, the envelope, and the map. Most of the time, I'm looking at the tune mix and also the loop. Now, if I were to go to the mini waveform icon over here, you can basically see 2 different drum loops when I click on each of them. For the first drum, I'm just going to make sure that the gain is at 0 dB over the tune here. The second drum, I'm going to make sure that the gain is 0 basically. If we were to play it right now, you only hear the first drum. And then if I want to layer it with the second drum, I can click on the second drum. And with the gain here, I'm just going to increase the volume and you can hear that it can actually be played together with the first drum. Just make sure if you want to do this, your drum loops are in the same tempo. With this, you can actually make an interesting drum loop, which later on you can apply effects like filters or reverb to make it less obvious in terms of having 2 samples in it to make it sound as one drum loop. Now, what I do as a trick to this is I sometimes have the tune up for one of the drums higher. So let's put the second drum tune higher. It creates this interesting kind of sound where you can make one drum loop faster and one drum loop slower. And the other basic part of it is you can actually choose where your start and your end of your drum loop. Say I want to put it at this start end and I want to end it somewhere here. So when you move this play range, you can see the bottom over here is also moving as well. Next thing is layering drum samples. Now I have these 2 kicks over here, kick 1 and kick 2. Right now we have this first kick. And I will increase the volume of the second kick so you can hear the difference. So that's a start for layering your kicks. Now, a good trick I would like to do this during the sampling of my individual one-shot drums is usually for the kicks, I'll put the first kick as the lower end. I'll just drag the end point here. And the second kick, I would want to have the higher end. And say if you like this higher end of the second kick, you can always drag the start and end points over here. On top of that, say if you want to have more higher end on the tail of the second kick, you can always increase the tune of this kick or decrease the tune. With this kind of resampling method, you can actually create your own drum kits. Same thing for the snare. If I were to go to the snare section over here, I have the first one with a strong snare, and then the second one with the tailing of the snare that I actually decrease the tune at -12. So let's play it. Now I can increase the tune of the second tailing of the snare, and it sounds like that as well. There's a lot of ways that you can manipulate your drum kits by layering more than one kind of drum element. Over here you have two, you can even add one more or two more, it's up to you. So the last thing I want to talk about is basically chopping up drum loops or samples. Now in this case I'm using a drum loop. If you want to chop up, you can always go to the slice section over here. Essentially, the slice section is the simplest way to chop up your samples. Now, if you look down here, there's this thing called the slicer. Now, at the bottom here, there's this manual mode where you can turn on the auto snap and you can click on the slice here and you can slice wherever you want. So it snaps to basically the transients of the drums itself, which is pretty cool. You don't have to do a lot of fine tuning because the transient snap is quite accurate. Now there's this thing called detag over here. When you select detag, it basically slices based on its own algorithm as of the tempo that you're working with. Now you can always change the sensitivity here. I can increase it. As you can see, when I increase it, there's more sample chops. When I decrease it, there's lesser sample chops. In order to hear what you have sliced, you can always click on the parts where it's already been chopped. So if you're not happy, you can always adjust it based on the slice start and end points. You can always adjust it wherever you want. This is also very useful if you want a quick head start of, doing a very quick detag of the sample chopping in Maschine itself. The next thing I want to talk about is split. They will split it into 4 different sections, or you can actually change it up to 8 or 16. Now this is a lot more useful because that whenever you split into this, they will detect the tempo and divide it into 16 or 32 beats or bars that can actually help you segregate your samples to the certain parts of your song. Now for this tutorial, I'm using a split mode with 16 slices because I want to translate these samples or chop samples into 16 new pads of a group. Say if you're happy with this and you like everything that you've auditioned so far, you can always transfer this to a new group. And how do you do that is when you go to the bottom right over here, there is this move icon. You can always use this and drag it to a group. And as you can see, all my sound slots here, they are already chopped up based on the samples that I have. One thing I like to do for this is I will go to the sound slot for each. I will select all of them and change it to ADSR. So whenever I hit a note, the note won't sustain as long as I release the note. Now let's just audition the chop samples that we have. So it's really cool that you can always rearrange this and play it however you want. For this final part, if you have these chop samples, this will be very useful. Basically, is to create a choke group. Now, how do you do that? Is when you go to the pad icon over here, you can see that all of these are assigned to each sample of a loop chopped from the previous sampler. If I were to select everything, I can put it to choke group 1. What this essentially does is when you hit a pad on Maschine, and then you hit another pad, the previous pad that was played will be chopped off. Example, if I'm using a pad 10, you can hear that whenever pad 10 is playing halfway and I press pad 8 along the way, pad 8 will override pad 10 in terms of the sound itself. So it will cut off pad 10 and go into pad 8. Let me just demonstrate to you one more time. Whenever people do a lot of sample chops, you can hear that it's being sampled when this choke group is active. So over here in Logic Pro, I have my machine integrated seamlessly with all the tracks assigned to each pad of machine. And if you guys are interested to know how to seamlessly integrate Machine and Logic Pro, I'm gonna link you up the video that I did previously on a tutorial up here. I hope this tutorial gives you a bit of justice on why you should still keep Machine in your DAW because of its sampling features. Now, if you are really a newbie and you don't know how to use Machine, don't worry because I do have a video tutorial that shows the basic workflows of Machine, and basically you can start using Machine or knowing how to use Machine from that tutorial itself. I'm gonna leave the tutorial up here. Also, if you guys have further questions regarding sampling in Machine, feel free to DM me on Instagram at Vibesynthetic. I'm gonna link you guys my IG profile in the link in description. I hope to connect with you guys and I hope to solve more problems regarding Machine and sampling features that I've not covered. Please feel free to DM me and I'll chat with you guys there. Now, as usual, if you guys really like this video, remember to like and subscribe to my channel and turn on the post notification bell button so whenever I release new Machine videos, you guys will get notified. My name is Vibesynthetic once again. It's been a pleasure with you guys and I want to do more videos hopefully in Machine. Remember to drop a comment if you have questions as well. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.